Hello and welcome back to Read Aloud with Dan. That's me, Dan. Today we're continuing our reading of Aimé Césaire's Discourse on Colonialism. This is part 2 of the reading of the main section of text. We continue. He says, colonization, bridgehead in a campaign to civilize barbarism, from which there may emerge at any moment the negation of civilization, pure and simple. He gives us his definition there, doesn't he? A bridgehead in a campaign to civilize barbarism. A bridgehead, by the way. Actually, I had to look. Sometimes I'd be looking up words. I don't know about you guys. I had to make sure I knew what this meant. And I guess I didn't. Because a bridgehead is a strong position secured by an army inside enemy territory from which to advance or attack. And so you're realizing, oh my gosh, there's all these like military terms that like you're not exactly aware of. There's these. No one knows everything. Okay, will always be these little spots in your brain where you reach out to grab a piece of knowledge, and there's nothing there. But the cool thing is, you can learn and like stick things in those empty pockets. I like that. That's cool. What we're doing here. Reading on, he says, elsewhere, I have cited at length a few incidents culled from the history of colonial expeditions. Unfortunately, he says, this did not find favor with everyone. Yeah, he pissed off a lot of people. They're calling this guy the enemy of Europe or some shit, which is actually pretty badass. If they called me enemy of Europe, I'd be so happy. Like, please, someone give me a cool ass name like that. That'd be cool. So he says, unfortunately, I didn't find favor with everyone. It seems I was pulling old skeletons out of the closet. Indeed, he says. And he asks, was there no point in quoting Colonel de Montagnac, one of the conquerors of Algeria? And intrepid viewers will notice a change in graphics. Quote, in order to banish the thoughts that sometimes besiege me, I have some heads cut off. Not the heads of artichokes, but the heads of men. Césaire asks, would it have been more advisable to refuse the floor to Count de Hérosson? Quote, it is true that we are bringing back a whole barrel full of ears collected pair by pair from prisoners, friendly or enemy. Should I have refused Saint Arnaud the right to profess his barbarous faith? Quote, we lay waste, we burn, we plunder. We destroy the houses and the trees. If that doesn't remind you of Israelis this week demolishing groves of olive trees in Palestine, I don't know what does. Césaire asks, should I have prevented Marshal Bugeaud from systematizing all that in a daring theory and invoking the precedent of famous ancestors, quote, We, I'm sorry, quote, we must have a great invasion of Africa, he says, like the invasions of the Franks and the Goths. Yikes. Lastly, should I have cast back into the shadows of, of oblivion oh my God, the memorable feat of arms of General Gerard and kept silent about the capture of Ambika? I'm not sure if it's on there. A city which, to tell the truth, had never dreamed of defending itself. Quote, the native riflemen had orders to kill only the men, but no one restrained them. Intoxicated by the smell of blood, they spared not one woman, not one child. At the end of the afternoon, the heat caused a light mist to arise. It was the blood of the 5,000 victims, the ghost of the city, evaporating into the setting sun. Sounds bad. Yes or no? Are these things true? And the sadistic pleasures, the nameless delights that send voluptuous shivers and quivers through Loti's carcass when he focuses his field glasses on a good massacre of the Anamis. True or not true? And I'm going to skip over that annotation. He says, true or not true? And if these things are true, as no one can deny, will it be said, in order to minimize them, that these corpses don't prove anything? For my part, if I have recalled a few details of these hideous butcheries, it is by no means because I take a morbid delight in them, but because I think that these heads of men, these collections of ears, these burned houses, these Gothic invasions, this steaming blood, these cities that evaporate at the edge of the sword, are not to be so easily disposed of. They prove that colonization, I repeat, dehumanizes even the most civilized men. That colonial activity, colonial enterprise, colonial conquest, which is based on contempt for the native and justified by that contempt, inevitably tends to change him who undertakes it. That the colonizer, who in order to ease his conscience gets into the habit of seeing the other man as an animal, accustoms himself to treating him like an animal, and tends objectively to transform himself into an animal. It is this result, this boomerang effect of colonization that I wanted to point out. And I have been channeling this sentiment a lot lately, haven't I? Especially since, the actions of the colonizers in so-called Israel. Brutalization of Palestinians by colonizers. And the despicable, dehumanized, and dehumanizing language that they use has forced me to reach this same conclusion independently of Césaire. So it is definitely reassuring to see it, the same sentiments shared so thoughtfully. the colonizer, through their dehumanization of the native, as Césaire says, in that process, dehumanizes themselves by treating others like an animal. And like, and even that's such a fucked up way to say it, you know. To treat others inhumanely removes your humanity. You can dehumanize yourself by dehumanizing others. And no, me pointing this out does not mean that I'm engaging in that process. So he says, unfair? No. There was a time when these same facts were a source of pride, and when, sure of the morrow, people did not mince words. One last quotation. It is from a certain Carl Siger, author of an essay sur la colonisation. And if I can take out my best guess as to what that translates to, I think it means essay on colonization. This was written in Paris in 1907. Carl Siger, I don't know. Says, the new countries offer a vast field for individual violent activities, which, in the metropolitan countries, would run up against certain prejudices, against a sober and orderly conception of life, and which, in the colonies, have greater freedom to develop and, consequently, to affirm their worth. Thus, to a certain extent, the colonies can serve as a safety valve for modern society. What? Even if this were their only value, it would be immense. My lord. Truly, Césaire says, there are stains that it is beyond the power of man to wipe out, and that can never be fully expiated. Expiated. I don't know. I didn't look that word up. Oh well. He says, but let us speak about the colonized. I see clearly what colonization has destroyed. The wonderful Indian civilizations, and neither Detterding nor Royal Dutch nor Standard Oil will ever console me for the Aztecs and the Incas. Detterding was one of the first executives of the Royal Dutch Petroleum Company. He says, I see clearly the civilizations condemned to perish at a future date, into which it has introduced a principle of ruin. The South Sea Islands, Nigeria, Nyasaland. Sorry if I said that. It's all right. It's part of the Federation of Rhodesia and Nyasaland. He says, I see clearly the contributions colonization, has made. Security, culture, the rule of law. In the meantime, I look around, and wherever there are colonizers and colonized face to face, I see force, brutality, cruelty, sadism, conflict, and, in a parody of education, the hasty manufacture of a few thousand subordinate functionaries, boys, artisans, office clerks, and interpreters necessary for the smooth operation of business. I spoke of contact between colonizer and colonized. there is room only for forced labor, intimidation, pressure, the police, taxation, theft, rape, compulsory crops, contempt, mistrust, arrogance, self-complacency, swinishness, brainless elites, degraded masses. No human contact, but relations of domination and submission, which turn the colonizing man into a classroom monitor, an army sergeant, a prison guard, a slave driver, and the indigenous man into an instrument of production. My turn to state an equation. Colonization equals thingification. Referring to the what he mentioned earlier, if I can find it. The right here, laid down the dishonest equations: Christianity equals civilization and paganism equals savagery. To there. Reading on. He says, I hear the storm. They talk to me about progress, about achievements, diseases cured, improved standards of living. I am talking about societies drained of their essence, cultures trampled underfoot, institutions undermined, lands confiscated, religions smashed, magnificent artistic creations destroyed, extraordinary possibilities wiped out. They throw facts at my head, statistics, mileages of roads, canals, and railroad tracks. I am talking about thousands of men sacrificed to the Congo Ocean, which was a railroad line connecting Brazzaville with the port of Pointe-Noire. He says, I'm talking about those who, as I write this, are digging the harbor of Abidjan by hand. I am talking about millions of men torn from their gods, their land, their habits, their life, from the dance, from wisdom. It says, I'm talking about millions of men in whom fear has been cunningly instilled, who've been taught to have an inferiority complex, to tremble, kneel, despair, and behave like flunkies. They dazzle me with the tonnage of cotton or cocoa that has been exported, the acreage that has been planted with olive trees or grapevines. I am talking about natural economies that have been disrupted, harmonious and viable economies adapted to the indigenous population, about food crops destroyed, malnutrition permanently introduced, agricultural development oriented solely toward the benefit of the metropolitan countries, about the looting of products, the looting of raw materials. They pride themselves on abuses eliminated. I, too, talk about abuses. But what I say is that on the old ones, very real, they have superimposed others, very detestable. They talk to me about local tyrants brought to reason. But I note that in general, the old tyrants get on very well with the new ones, and that there has been established between them to the detriment of the people a circuit of mutual services and complicity. He's talking about the local compradors. They talk to me about civilization. I talk about proletarian, proletarianization and mystification. I knew I was going to stumble over that word, you know. For my part, I make a systematic defense of the non-European civilizations. Every day that passes, every denial of justice, every beating by the police, every demand of the workers that is drowned in blood, every scandal that is hushed tip, it's got to be hushed up, every punitive expedition, every police van, every gendarme, and every militiaman brings home to us the value of our old societies. They were communal societies, never societies of the many for the few. Class societies. They were societies that were anti or ante. It's sort of hard to say this. They were not only anti-capitalist, as has been said, but also anti-capitalist. How am I supposed to say that out loud? He says they were democratic societies always. They were cooperative societies, fraternal societies. I make a systematic defense of the societies destroyed by imperialism. They were the fact. They did not pretend to be the idea. Despite their faults, they were neither to be hated nor condemned. They were content to be. In them, neither the word failure nor the word avatar had any meaning. They kept hope intact. And I'm not going to lie, he's losing me here. I don't know what that sentence. What? Airbender? He says, whereas those are the only words that can, in all honesty, be applied to the European enterprises outside Europe. My only consolation is that periods of colonization pass, that nations sleep only for a time, and that peoples remain. This being said, it seems that in certain circles they pretend to have discovered in me an enemy of Europe, quote unquote, and a prophet of the return to the anti-European past. Again, would someone please give me a title that badass? That would be very great. Thank you very much. And thank you. Césaire says, for my part, I search in vain for the place where I could have expressed such views, where I ever underestimated the importance of Europe in the history of human thought, where I ever preached a return of any kind, where I ever claimed that there could be a return. The truth is that I've said something very different. To wit, that the great historical tragedy of Africa has been not so much that it was too late in making contact with the rest of the world, as the manner in which that contact was brought about. That Europe began to propagate at a time when it had fallen into the hands of the most unscrupulous financiers and captains of industry. That it was our misfortune to encounter that particular Europe on our path, and that Europe is responsible before the human community for the highest heap of corpses in history. Yikes. I don't think he likes Europe, you guys. He says in another connection, in judging colonization, I have added that Europe has gotten very well indeed with all the local feudal lords who agreed to serve, woven a villainous complicity with them, rendered their tyranny more effective and more efficient, and that it has actually tended to prolong artificially the survival of local pasts in their most pernicious aspects. Hmm. Bourgeoisie promised to liberate, the masses from feudalism, and they just replaced the feudal lords with themselves. He says that if I am attacked on the grounds of intent, I maintain that colonialist Europe is dishonest in trying to justify its colonizing activity posterior, oh my God, after the fact, by the obvious material progress that has been achieved in certain fields under the colonial regime. Since sudden change is always possible, in history as elsewhere. Since no one knows at what stage of material development these same countries would have been if Europe had not intervened. Since the technical outfitting of Africa and Asia, their administrative reorganization, in a word, their Europeanization, was, as is proved by the example of Japan, in no way tied to the European occupation. Oh, fuck, that's. Since the Europeanization of the non European continents could have been accomplished otherwise than under the heel of Europe. Since this movement of Europeanization was in progress. Since it was even slowed down. Since, in any case, it was distorted by the European takeover. The proof is that at present, it is the indigenous peoples of Africa and Asia who are demanding schools, and colonialist Europe which refuses them. That it is the African who is asking for ports and roads, and colonialist Europe which is niggardly on this score. That it is the colonized man who wants to move forward, and the colonizer who holds things back. Holding things back while acting like a force for progressivism. Many such cases. Thinking of Democrats, in general. To go further, I make no secret of my opinion that at the present time, the barbarism of Western Europe has reached an incredibly high level, being only surpassed, far surpassed, that is true, by the barbarism of the United States. That's right, you guys, we're number one. He says, and I'm not talking about Hitler or the prison guard or the adventurer, but about the decent fellow across the way. Not about the member of the SS or the gangster, but about the respectable bourgeois. In a time gone by, Leo Bloy innocently became indignant over the fact that swindlers, perjurers, forgers, thieves, and procurers were given the responsibility of bringing to the Indies the example of Christian virtues. We've made progress. Today it is the possessor of the Christian virtues who intrigues, with no small success, for the honor of administering overseas territories according to the methods of forgers and torturers. A sign that cruelty, mendacity, baseness, and corruption have sunk deep into the soul of the European bourgeoisie. I repeat that I am not talking about Hitler or the SS or pogroms or summary executions, but about a reaction caught unawares, a reflex permitted, a piece of cynicism tolerated. And if evidence is wanted, I could mention a scene of cannibalistic hysteria that I've been privileged to witness in the French National Assembly. By Jove, my dear colleagues, as they say, I take off my hat to you. A cannibal's hat, of course. Getting a little weird in here. But he says, think of it. 90,000 dead in Madagascar. Indochina trampled underfoot, crushed to bits, assassinated. Tortures brought back from the depths of the Middle Ages. And what a spectacle. The delicious shudder that roused the dozing deputies. The wild uproar. Bedalt, looking like a communion wafer covered with shit. Unctuous and sanctimonious. Mutet, the cannibalism of shady deals and sonorous nonsense. Costa Floret, the cannibalism of an unlicked bear cub, a blundering fool. I think it's just getting his punches in here, you know. He says, unforgettable, gentlemen. With fine phrases as cold and solemn as a mummy's wrappings, they tie up the Madagascan. With a few conventional words, they stab him for you. The time it takes to wet your whistle, and they disembowel him for you. Fine work. Not a drop of blood will be wasted. Wow. He's got some heat for these guys, these apologists of colonialism. He says, the ones who drink it, the blood, to the last drop, never adding any water. The ones like Ramadier, who smear their faces with it in the manner of Silenus. So, in classical mythology, this is an annotation from the work itself, from Césaire himself. He says, in classical mythology, Silenus was a satyr. This is a class of lustful, drunken woodland gods. He was the son of Pan. So I'm sort of getting like Peter Pan vibes, right? He says he was the foster father of Bacchus, the god of wine, which is fucking awesome, dude. Oh, that is so good. And is described as a jolly old man, usually drunk. That's Silenus. Again, he says Ramadier, Ramadier, this guy, who smear their faces with it in the manner of Silenus. Fontlup Esperager. Nope. Esperaber. Fontlup Esperaber. Who starches his mustache with it. I couldn't find a photo of this. The walrus mustache of an ancient Gaul. Old Desjardins bending over the emanations from the vat and intoxicating himself with it as with new wine. I don't know what he's saying here. Violence, he says. The violence of the weak. a significant thing. It is not the head of a civilization that begins to rot first. It is the heart. He says, I admit that as far as the health of Europe and civilization is concerned, these cries of kill, kill, and let's see some blood, belched forth by trembling old men and virtuous young men educated by the Jesuit fathers, make a much more disagreeable impression on me than the most sensational bank holdups that ever occur in Paris. Same. And that, mind you, is by no means an exception. On the contrary, bourgeois swinishness is the rule. We've been on its trail for a century. We listen to it, for it. We take it by surprise. We sniff it out. We follow it, lose it, find it again, shadow it, and every day it is more nauseatingly exposed. Oh, the racism of these gentlemen does not bother me. I do not become indignant over it. I merely examine it. I note it, and that is all. I am almost grateful to it for exposing itself openly and appearing in broad daylight as a sign. A sign that the intrepid class which once stormed the Bastilles is now hamstrung. A sign that it feels itself to be mortal. A sign that it feels itself to be a corpse. And when the corpse starts to babble, you get this sort of thing. There was only too much truth in this first impulse of the Europeans who, in the century of Columbus, refused to recognize as their fellow men the degraded inhabitants of the New World. One cannot gaze upon the savage for an instant without reading the anathema written. I do not say upon his soul alone, but even on the external form of his body. And it's signed Joseph de Maistre. I don't know, probably saying that fucking French, right? That's what is ground out by the mystical mill. And then you get this. I'll switch this image now. From the selectionist point of view, I would look upon it as unfortunate if there should be a very great numerical expansion of the yellow and black elements, which would be difficult to eliminate. Oh my God. However, if the society of the future is organized on a dualistic basis with a ruling class of dolichocephalic blondes and a class of inferior race confined to the roughest labor, yikes. It is possible that this latter role would fall to the yellow and black elements. In this case, moreover, they would not be an inconvenience for the dolichocephalic blondes, what is that word, but an advantage. It must not be forgotten that slavery is no more abnormal than the domestication of the horse or the ox. Motherfucker, face the wall. This guy goes on to say, it's therefore possible that it may reappear in the future in one form or another. It is probably even inevitable that this will happen if the simplistic solution does not come about instead. That of a single superior race leveled out by selection. Bro, they're doing like... These guys are doing... What is this? What is this theory called? What's the term? I can't remember what the term is called. He's like trying to like use evolution as a weapon. It's really weird. So he says, that is what is ground out by the scientific mill, and it's signed Le Pogue. I think that's the guy you're looking at here. And you also get this from the literary mill this time. I know that. I must believe myself superior to the poor bayas of the Mambere. I know that I must take pride in my blood, says this guy. He says, when a superior man ceases to believe himself superior, he actually ceases to be superior. When a superior race ceases to believe itself a chosen race, it actually ceases to be a chosen race. You could just say anything, you guys. It doesn't have to be true. It says, and it's signed Saikari Soldier of Africa. And I have no idea what that means. You tell me. He says, translate it into newspaper jargon and you get Fajwe. This guy. The barbarian is of the same race, after all, as the Roman and the Greek. He is a cousin. The yellow man, the black man, is not our cousin at all. Oh my God. Here, there is a real difference, a real distance, and a very great one. An ethnological difference. Distance, he says. After all, civilization has never yet been made except by whites. Jesus Christ. If Europe becomes yellow, there will certainly be a regression, a new period of darkness and confusion. That is, another Middle Ages. And then lower, always lower, to the bottom of the pit. Lower than the shovel can go. Monsieur Jules Romain of the Académie Française and the Revue des Deux Mondes. I don't care if I'm saying that wrong. Fuck you, French people. He says it doesn't matter, of course, that Monsieur Ferragoul, I don't have a photo of them, changes his name once again. Oh, it's the same guy. And here calls himself Salsette for the sake of convenience. And I don't know what that's referring to. I'm going to skip it. He says the essential thing is that Monsieur Jules Romain goes so far as to write this. I am willing to carry on a discussion only with people who agree to pose the following hypothesis. A France that had on its metropolitan soil 10 million blacks, 5 or 6 million of them in the valley of the Garonne. Would our valiant populations of the Southwest never have been touched by race prejudice? Would there not have been the slightest apprehension if the question had arisen of turning all powers over to these Negroes, the sons of slaves? I once had opposite me a row of some 20 pure blacks. I will not even censure our Negroes and Negresses for chewing gum. I will only note that this movement has the effect of emphasizing the jaws, and that the associations which come to mind evoke the equatorial forest rather than the procession of the Panathenea. The black race, he says, has not yet produced, will ever never produce an Einstein, a Stravinsky, a Gershwin. Jesus fucking Christ, man. You know what? The white race will never produce John Coltrane, okay? Suck my big fat dick from the back, you fucking freaks. White race will never produce Michael Jackson. Why am I only picking musicians? I'm sorry. White race will never create a Colin Powell. Wait, hold on. They actually, that's... check that one. Um, Let me keep brainstorming and I'll get back to you guys. All right. So he says, one idiotic comparison for another. Since the prophet of the Revue du Mondes, or whatever, and other places invites us to draw parallels between widely separated things, may I be permitted, Negro that I am, to think, no one being master of his free associations, that his voice has less in common with the rustling of the oak of Dodona, or even the vibrations of the cauldron, than with the braying of a Missouri ass. Okay, and I guess we got to talk about this. This is an annotation that he included here. It says, the responses of the celebrated Greek oracle at Dodona were revealed in the rustling of the leaves of a sacred oak tree. The cauldron, a famous treasure of the temple, consisted of a brass figure holding in its hand a whip made of chains, which, when agitated by the wind, struck a brass cauldron, producing extraordinarily prolonged vibrations. That's the reference. His voice has less in common with the rustling of the oak of Dodona, or even the vibrations of the cauldron, than with the braying of a Missouri ass. He says he sounds like a donkey. Once again, I systematically defend our old Negro civilizations. They were courteous civilizations. So the real problem, you say, is to return to them. No, I repeat, we are not men for whom it is a question of either or. For us, the problem is not to make a utopian and sterile attempt to repeat the past, but to go ahead. It is not a dead society that we want to revive. We leave that to those who go in for exoticism. Nor is it the present colonial society that we wish to prolong, the most putrid carrion that has ever rotted under the sun. It is a new society that we must create, with the help of all our brother slaves. A society rich with all the productive power of modern times, warm with all the fraternity of olden days. For some examples showing that this is possible, we can look to the Soviet Union. But let us return to Monsieur Jules Romain. One cannot say that the petty bourgeois has never read anything. On the contrary, he has read everything, devoured everything. Yeah, I mean, he can afford to have a nice big bookshelf with hardcover books. And you and me gotta download PDFs and turn them into EPUBs. And we're simply not the same. He says only his brain functions after the fashion of a certain elementary types of digestive systems. It filters. And the filter lets through only what can nourish the thick skin of the bourgeois' clear conscience. Yeah, capitalism does this thing where it makes you think you're thinking when you're not thinking. You're actually just filtering. Something happens on the road to becoming a communist where you sort of start to think independently. Reading on, before the arrival of the French in their country, the Vietnamese were people of an old culture, exquisite and refined. To recall this fact upsets the digestion of the Banque d'Indochine. I don't know, man. Start the forgetting machine, he says. Start the forgetting machine. Good name for a band. He says these Madagascans who are being tortured today, less than a century ago, were poets, artists, administrators? Shh. Keep your lips buttoned, and silence falls. Silence as deep as a safe. Fortunately, there are still the Negroes. Ah, the Negroes. Let's talk about the Negroes. I'm not really sure what he's getting at here. So, I'm just hanging on sometimes when I'm reading this stuff. He says, all right, let's talk about them. About the Sudanese empires, about the bronzes of Benin, Shango sculpture. That's all right with me. It will give us a chance from all the sensationally bad art that adorns so many European capitals. About African music. Why not? And about what the first explorers said, what they saw, not those who feed at the company mangers, mangers. Not sure what that means, but the Dielbis, the Marcais, the Pigafettas. I don't know what any of those mean. He says, and then Frobenius. This guy, Frobenius, say, you know who he was, Frobenius? And we read together, quote, civilized to the marrow of their bones. The idea of the barbaric Negro is a European invention. The petty bourgeois doesn't want to hear anymore. With a twitch of his ears, he flicks the idea away. And I think that's a good spot to pause for the day. I think we'll pause there. He flicks the idea away. The idea, an annoying fly. I want to thank you for joining me today here on Read Aloud. If you like my content, and I hope you do, follow, like, subscribe, share, tell your friends, tell your enemies. They're your enemies because they haven't read this stuff yet. But just want to say thank you to everyone who's ever supported my content. Thank you to all supporters on Patreon right now. I think I'm up to about $33 a month support on Patreon. That's about maybe like $1.50 per stream. So if you think that I deserve more than that, and if you got a couple bucks laying around, you can help improve that ratio. I really appreciate you. Love your face. Check out the next reading, part 3, which will be tomorrow. Live viewers, stick around. Replay viewers, check out part 3. Love your face.